There are so many myths around business storytelling and around storytelling in the workplace and around storytelling in general. Some of them are around the fact that leaders who are introverts cannot be storytellers, or that storytelling in the workplace is something too emotional, or maybe it's about the fact that leaders don't have enough stories to tell and they don't belong to the workplace anyway. Hi, welcome to today's episode of these mini series that I've been doing here on LinkedIn, where I talk about business and storytelling and how to make sure that it's implemented with strategically in the business. My name is Beatrice Ngalula Kabutakapua. I am the founder and CEO of the Business Storytelling Center. And this is a leadership development firm where we train and coach, especially leaders from historically marginalized backgrounds, so that they own the storytelling skills and they can communicate the vision, they can communicate the culture of the company, that they can show the culture of the company in a way that it's effective and that really engage the team and their employees, and they do that through stories. So in the past few weeks, I've been coming live on LinkedIn and I've been talking about business storytelling and how it can be used as a leadership tool, but also how it can be made part of the strategy at large in the company, so of the business strategy. And throughout this journey, I have talked about the importance of storytelling in leadership, how to use it as a tool, what are the 3 steps to make sure that storytelling is implemented in the leadership strategy, but also some of the ways that you can make sure that it's part of the business, the storytelling, it's part of the business strategy, and it's not just something that 1 or 2 leaders do. In the coming weeks, I will have guests who will come in live with me and we will talk about the impact of storytelling within ERG in the company. So, employees' resource groups and what it looks like for them, the impact of storytelling when it comes to team bonding, and also one of my favorite topic, why leaders are often afraid of sharing stories. But for today, I wanted to focus on all, well, obviously not all of them, but some of the myths that are thrown around business storytelling, and I wanted to let you know why they're not true. If you go back to the past lives and you watch the other videos, you will learn a lot of the background information of the theories of storytelling on how to implement it. If you really want to make sure that you put the knowledge into practice, I want to invite you to an in-person training session that I will be running in London on June 6th. This will be a bit of a lunch and learn session in central London in Triton Square, and I will put the details in the comment. And you will have a couple of hours with me where I will talk you through how to use storytelling as a leadership tool. But not just, it's not going to be an academic presentation. It's something very practical. I will share a framework with you that came from the experience that I had in storytelling with, the hundreds of leaders that I've coached. I will share this framework and we will focus on one point in particular. If you want to learn more about the framework, let me know, send me a message. Otherwise, I would love to see you on the 6th of June, and I will make sure to put the link to book your place in the comment. Now, today, as I mentioned, I want to focus on the myth around business storytelling. And before I share 7 of them, I made a selection because I could have gone, I could have made the list much longer, but I decided to focus on 7 of them. And before I share that, I should be able to see your comments as well from here because I'm connecting from StreamYard. So let me know where you are connecting from. If we haven't spoken for a while, say hi and let me know what part of the world you are connecting from. And while you do that, I will start with the first myth on business storytelling. So, the very first thing that most of the leaders tell me when it comes to sharing stories and using storytelling strategically and telling stories in general is oh, I don't think I have stories to tell. And let me know if this is something that you have personally thought, or whether you heard maybe your colleagues or your leader shares, because it's something that comes up quite often in my conversations. Now, obviously, my first reaction to this, my very first response is that, of course, you have stories to tell because every single person in the universe has stories to tell. And you have stories to tell in the workplace as well. The reason why oftentimes leaders don't think that they have stories to tell is because when it comes to storytelling, it's something that we have detached so much from our experience that we don't see how it can actually be part of something that we do on a daily basis or something that we bring at work. And what I mean by that is that when we think about stories, we think about the movies, we think about the TV series, we think about the books, we think about these huge events and conferences and speeches and people who are at the very high leadership level. And that creates a very big distance between stories and yourself, storytelling and yourself, to the point where you don't think that you have a story to share. And this is also because when we think about the stories that you could share, oftentimes it's easy to think about very dramatic stories or very traumatic stories or very strong stories. The truth, though, is that the reason why we tell story, the reason why leaders tell stories, is because they want to share a lesson. Now, whatever story has brought you a lesson, whatever part of your lived experience brought you a lesson, that's a story that you can tell. And it doesn't matter whether it has special effects or it has lots of drama or lots of emotions. It doesn't really matter because you don't share for those parts of it. You share because of the lesson. You share because you want to make sure that your team understands, it's clear, they are engaged, they are on the same path, and they understand the values and the culture. So everyone has a story to tell. Let me know if this is something that you have ever heard or that you have ever thought. I'm going to try and see whether I can check the comments in the meantime. But yeah, let me know if this is something that you have ever thought for yourself as well, or whether it's something that you possibly heard other leaders share, that they don't have enough stories or they don't have stories to tell at all. Okay, now on to myth number. The second thing that I often hear organizations leaders share is that stories are just too long. They take too much time. And this is actually something that they shared with me. Something like, oh, I cannot just stop people in the corridor and tell them this very long story. And they get it. And again, we are used to story being very long, and we are used to hear very long stories. However, there is no written rule that says that stories need to be long. Personally, one of the most beautiful stories that I've ever read was this very short, and it said, "You bear seeds, but you didn't know your seeds." And I understand that it's like a poetic story, almost like a poem than a story, but it still gives you something. It still gives you a lesson. Now, the story that you share in the workplace don't necessarily need to be a poem, or they don't necessarily need to be this short. They do, however, don't need to be long either. In fact, oftentimes the more you reflect on a story, the more you work on a story that you want to share, the shorter the story will be, because you will understand that there are so many elements of it that are not relevant to the audience. And that's the main goal. Make sure that your audience gets it, understands. And that means making sure that you are sharing something in a space and time that they can also use. Now, the third myth that I want to share. So I shared the one that says that no story to tell, stories are too long. The third myth that I want to share is introverts are not great storytellers. An introvert, I could almost get offended by it. However, I don't. That we have the image of the storyteller being someone who is outspoken, who is an extrovert, who is, connecting with people. And this is just a misconceptions, because leaders who are introverts are leaders who, first of all, reflect a lot on things. They connect to people, but they oftentimes connect on a more intimate way, a more intimate level with, smaller groups. And that doesn't mean that they cannot tell stories. Actually, in my experience, working with introverts means that the reflection on the story and on the lesson comes so easier. So storytelling is not about, speaking, being outspoken and being an extrovert, or getting lots of energy from connecting to people. It's about making sure that the story you share resonates with your audience in an effective way, in an immediate way. And there is no way that you need to have to make sure that happens. What you need is a structure, a framework, is clarity, is reflection, and most of all, a goal. Why are you sharing the story? There needs to be a purpose behind it. So everyone can be a great storyteller. Also, because the greatness behind the storytelling part is not given by whether you are an introvert or an extrovert. It's given by the amount of practice that you have in telling the story. So the more you practice, the better you get at it. Or more so, the more you practice, the more comfortable you become sharing stories. Introversion is about the way people digest energy, the way they balance their energy. It's not about their skills or the abilities to tell stories. It's about the fact that they interact with smaller groups, that they reflect more, that they enjoy their quiet. But that has nothing to do with being able to tell a story or not. Fourth myth that I'm going to share is stories are too emotional. Because again of the image that we have around storytelling and where stories are coming from for us most of the time, which is the fictional space, it's easy to think about stories as something that makes people cry or gives too many emotions. But there are 2 points that I want to make on this. First of all, there is nothing wrong in connecting people through their emotions. It's actually one of the best things you can do through stories, and when you are communicating the vision of the company, or the culture of the company, or the way the team must work together. And in that sense, storytelling has a gives us as human a physical reaction for which we are much more likely to listen to a character-driven story and to digest that, then digest data numbers. So the fact that storytelling is too emotional, it's actually an advantage for the effectiveness of the story. The second point that I want to make on this is that everything is emotional, right? Every type of communication can get or can become emotional. And as humans, before being humans or before being employees, you are going to be emotional in some ways. So the idea that emotions are not part of the workplace, it's it's not real. It's not true. Emotions are important, whether you share stories or not. So emotional doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation to it. So go ahead and share the stories, get emotional, be emotional, connect people through emotion. Myth number five is something that I read actually here on LinkedIn, and it was part of a series of suggestions that people were giving leaders around storytelling. And what they say was do what you can. And the context of it was that when you have to share a story, don't worry too much about how you're shooting it, how you're framing it, how you're structuring it, how you're presenting it. Just do what you can. And we just with it. I wouldn't necessarily think it as a bad advice. However, it does reinforce the idea that storytelling doesn't necessarily need to be a strategic element in organization. It invites people to just do it. When I train my leaders and employees in storytelling, I give them framework for their leadership journey and framework to share an effective story. Now, the framework to share an effective story is made of five elements. And once they walk out of the training session, I'm expecting them to apply all the five elements all at once. I do tell them to pick one, implement that over and over again. And once that element is part of the way they present story, then they can implement the second element. Once that's part of how they implement stories, they can implement the third element, so on and so forth. I do invite them to not judge themselves too harshly and just do it, just practice and just tell the stories. But I do not agree with the fact that you just have to do what you can, because that means that there doesn't needs to be a structure, a strategic intention behind it, and that's not what we want. That really reinforces the idea that storytelling is like a fluffy thing that you can just wing and you can do it however you want. That's not the case, especially if you want to scale it in terms of integrating it in the leadership strategy in the organization. And also, if you want to make sure that it's part of actually how the company does things or how the team does things. So you want to have a structure, a framework in place, and then you just want to try and do it over and over and over again. Again, it's the practice. Now, the myth number six is stories don't belong to the workplace. We have this idea that stories don't belong to the workplace. However, everything, every element, every piece of communication is potentially telling us a story. For companies, it's so common to share stories to the outside world. So they share stories to clients, to investors, to board members, to everyone who is outside in a way of the organization. And the intent is clear, is the influencing part, is the choose us as a company part, is the advertisement, the brand awareness, is the retention, is the attracting talent. So everything goes outside. However, from what I've seen working as a business storytelling coach for the past years, you cannot share outside stories that are not inside, which means that the stories that you first share to the outside world need to be reflected in inside world, so within the organization. Otherwise, what happens is that there is a divide in the reality of things, and especially when it comes to talent attraction. If the stories that you share with the talent are not then reflected inside, employees will be the first one not to be able to be ambassadors for the company, but also the talent will realize that, and they will leave. They will look for places where the outside stories match the inside stories. So stories do belong to the workplace in so many different ways. They belong to the workplace for the stories that, for instance, home teams share with the employees. Belong to the workplace for the stories that the CEOs share with employees through their communications, but also through their actions. In the first video of this series, I shared with you how storytelling is really about three elements. It's about listening, performing the story, and then actually taking action on this. So it's not just about the communication, but it's also about the action that employees see. It's about the stories that leaders tell their teams. It's about the stories that teams share with each other when they're trying to bond and to get stronger, to get more innovative, and to get more productive. It's about the stories that you share in terms of the impact of the team members. It's about the stories that you share when it comes to change and why change happens and what that change means. So in a way, the story of the future. Stories already are in the workplace. They need to be placed in a more strategic way and in a way that works for leaders, their teams, and employees at large. The last myth I'm going to share with you is again something that I've read, and I believe this is a whole different conversation. I believe it was it was part of an article, and the article was written using ChatGPT, which is okay, but we need to be careful about the material that is shared through that, because one of the suggestions that was given when it comes to sharing stories was family part. I have so much to say on just this point, but I will limit myself and I will say, first of all, follow your heart and the connection to the workplace. It's a very difficult link to make for any leader or any employee or anyone in the workplace, because the two things are not usually put together. But also on a personal level, if you think about it on an individual level, when in any space or in any song or in any content, people are told to follow their heart. It's just something that it's so difficult. It's a challenge all of itself, and it's not helpful advice. It's not an helpful advice because it's limiting and it doesn't explain much, and it also reduces again storytelling to something simply of the heart and of the emotions, and not something that can be strategically practically used in the organization. So, yes, you can follow your heart in terms of finding the stories that you want to share and connect to those emotions, understanding how they make you feel and how they will make feel your team. But following your heart per se doesn't mean much. In fact, doesn't mean anything in the context of, sharing stories in the workplace. And please do let me know if you disagree with me, and if you think that, there is another view that I haven't explored around this. But one thing that is frustrating as well is that when you invite leaders or companies or employees or team members to follow their heart when they're sharing stories, you're also telling them to be strategic enough with the story. So storytelling is something that everyone can do. It is something that when it comes to the workplace, it needs strategic abilities, which means that people internally in the workplace needs to be trained in how to share stories. And that goes from leaders to employees to everyone in the organization. And it will be such an easy and cost-effective way to do that. As I mentioned before, storytelling is a very scalable tool that companies can use. All right, so these are the seven needs that I wanted to share with you when it comes to business storytelling. I really want to hear from you and see whether there are some of them that you have heard of, some others that you could add, or some with whom you don't necessarily agree with me and you want to share your. Let me know in the comments whether you do it right now or you do it later when you watch this video. But I'm really curious to hear from you. Next week, I'm going to be here with Maria Victoria Laterza, and we are going to talk about why leaders struggle to share their stories, where that struggle is coming from, and how they can work on it. So for today, this is it from me. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I will be delivering an in-person training session on how to use storytelling as a leadership tool. So practical ways in which you can take this thing that has been said to be fluff or not strategic enough, use it in a strategical way for your leadership journey and also to increase your confidence and influence and clarity in communication. The training session is happening on June 6th. You can get tickets which are £120 per person, and I will put the link to the Eventbrite page in the comments. Let me know if you have questions, thoughts, feedback, and I'll see you next week.